was born on July 26, 1944, in the same city as George Armstrong Custer, the infamous general. Monroe, Michigan is where he's from, so am I. His dad was a blacksmith there. And my parents were Harold and Virginia Stotz. They were, my dad was a farmer his whole life, very active in community affairs, having held several local offices up to and including county commissioner of Monroe County for a while. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. Before they married, she had been a secretary. They were both born on the same day in 1918 and were true children of the Depression. I'm going down this list here. So anyway, they were devout Missouri Lutherans religiously, and church was a big part of our life. And my extended family is very large and pretty much all located in Monroe County, Michigan to this day. I had two siblings, a younger sister, Susan, who's still living, and a younger brother, Nick, who has deceased, and he was like a year and a half younger than myself. And he was drafted and served in the U.S. Army in Korea during the Vietnam era. I started out with attending school. I went to a one-room school, rural school, for a year and a half. And then from there on, my primary and secondary education was in a small town, Ida, Michigan, where I graduated in 1962. My goals in high school originally were to also become a farmer. I love growing up and living on the farm, and a lot to do with the farm. And so when I went to college, I entered an agricultural curriculum that was for a 2-year associate's degree in agriculture. When I got there, I decided I really liked college, so I went on and got a bachelor's degree in agribusiness from Michigan State University. I had never had any intentions of entering military service. My family on both sides, my mother's and father's, both had men that were drafted and served in World War II. So our family already had plenty of donation of whatever to military service. My dad's one brother was automatic rifleman in the 2nd Division, then was involved in D-Day. My mother's brother was in the 6th Infantry Division under MacArthur and participated in the Battle for Luzon, which was the longest single, continuous battle of World War II, apparently. And so I had grown up around, this people that had been in the service, none of which chose it as a career option. They didn't, just did what they had to do and came home. My uncle got malaria while he was there. He was a water-cooled machine gunner, and he went from being a private to a master sergeant in about 2 years because of casualties that his unit had, and Then, of course, he was very sick when he came home from the malaria. The questions go on. Did I have a career before the military experience? I did not have much. My goal was, after it appeared that the farm wasn't going to be large enough to support. I had so many cousins and so on that were involved in this farm, my grandfather's farm, and my particular favorite part of it had always been machinery. So my goal was to work in the farm machinery industry, which I eventually did for 40 years. But that whole thing was interrupted by being drafted in 1968. I did not want to participate in the military, was my idea, but I didn't have a choice in it. So I made the best of it by going to officer candidate school, or signing up for it and completing it. And I got commissioned in January of '69. Went to officer candidate school. I was home on leave and got married. I had planned to be married too the year I got drafted. My wife went with me to officer candidate school, which some wives did, some wives didn't, but she was a trooper and went through that with me. We couldn't live together. Another hardship, we got all our stuff, worldly goods, in a U-Haul and went down there to Fort Sill for me to report for duty in August of '68 to start the 6-month officer candidate school. And one of the harshest things was the Army really didn't want relatives and families with them, with us. So there was, like, if you were a field grade officer, you could get a nice old house on the fort to live in as part of your compensation. If you were like a young enlisted person or officer, you had to go on the local economy and find a place to live.
What base was this?
Fort Sill, Oklahoma. It's where the Army's whole field artillery operation is, and training is, in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And it was at that time too. It's in Lawton, Oklahoma, southwest Oklahoma. And anyway, we ended up buying a house there after I got commissioned, because the housing was so poor. You know, there were so many people that had been drafted and that were in these schools at the base that there just wasn't enough housing. You know, and that should have been the Army's responsibility for us, I think. You know, it's bad enough you get drafted and ripped out of your your nice life. At least they could provide housing for you.
Yeah.
Nothing, you know, just, why would you want to work for an employer like that? We wanted to start a family, so when I had my orders for Vietnam, she was expecting, and she went to live with her sister in California till I got back. There's a question here: what were your friends' opinions about your entering the service? At that time, 1968, this war had already become a bad idea. It was polarizing the country, and it was mostly about everybody was trying to find a way out of doing it, honestly. So that's where people were. There were people getting married young and having kids and so on, so anything to get an exemption. And I managed to complete my education before I went in.
Given that your family had such a rich history of military service, going back to World War II and the Korean War, did your family have a different feel? Were they also experiencing those similar feelings that your friends were having? Like they don't want you to go in, and
Not
yeah,
overtly. They weren't people that talked a lot about feelings. So I'm sure, especially my mother was fearful because of what her brother had been through, and but it was there was a lot of stoicism about it,
yeah,
and I was actually a lot of, probably fortunately, by the time I actually got to Vietnam, I was an old man compared to the average soldier there. Mostly, I turned 26 over there, and most of the young men that were in with me were 18, 19 years old, and I just had that going for me, I guess, as I had some somewhat of maturity. I have to say that I was never an enthusiastic soldier. I'm not ashamed of that because it was not a good cause, as it turns out. We all know that now. But so anyway, I about 15, 20 years ago, I wrote down. You may want to bleep this, but I wrote down my thoughts on Vietnam. Just one night, I just wrote this one sentence. The Vietnam War was about the unwilling being led by the unqualified to do the unnecessary for the ungrateful. And that's exactly how I feel about that war. There were 59,000 roughly young Americans killed over it, multiple more that were maimed, and there was no real purpose in it for the United States that I can see. It was a thing we got into for who knows what reason, but it was unfortunate and it caused a lot of issues in the United States here. But by the time I got over there, the protesting and everything, I think the incident at Kent State was in the spring of 60 or 70.
what what is going through your head when you receive that draft notice in the mail?
I was very discouraged because as I said before, I put myself through college working $1 and $2 and $4 an hour jobs. Very little help from my parents and I didn't expect it because they just didn't have it. But in that day and age, you could, it cost $1,200 a year to go full time to Michigan State University for books, tuition, room and board, and some pizza. $1,200. You could round that up in the summer doing $1, $2 an hour work. But I did. That's what I did. I paid my way through college. All I wanted to do is get out and work in the industry that I loved, and I had to put that all off for 3 years. And my it was a negative thing for me. No two ways about it. But I calculated out that I probably that 3 years that I spent in the military was compelled to be in the military, I probably lost $30,000, I know I did, of 1970 money versus what I could have made in the industry that I chose. And so, you know, when I got out, I was 3 years behind. And that's the part of the sacrifice. And that sacrifice was not doled out fairly between all the people in the United States. I had a couple brother-in-laws that had been able to go to school and get employed in the aerospace industry, and they got out of it, and they made big money. I couldn't get out of it. I would have if I could have done it honorably and legally, but I couldn't, and neither could a lot of other people. And so, yeah, I guess you can write it off to bitterness, but I think I'm also philosophical about it. It's what I had to do, and I did it, and I'm still not sure that even all volunteer service is the right thing. I think that at that time, everybody was maneuvering to get out of it. I had one boss when I did get to work in the farm equipment industry that had gotten out of the draft, but he was a school teacher during that time. Nothing he wanted to do, but it was a way out of the service. And that just, you know, if we want to talk about, you know, patriotism and being, you know, some people have to give a lot more sacrifice to that than others, and some just don't. I don't know what, but it's like it's there has to be a way to do this compulsory service if it's necessary, where everyone has to sacrifice, regardless of their background, their wealth, their family, their position in the community, and what other obligations they have, because it just it took my freedom away for 3 years. That's just how I feel about it. And I appreciate this opportunity to vent. It's not like I, you know, it ruined my life or anything. A lot of the things that are promoted about military service, like the business of there's the leadership training. Military leadership only works in the military, or maybe possibly a police department. It doesn't function in industry because you can't tell people what to do anymore. You have to encourage them to do it, lead them to do it, versus in the military, you have to do what you're told. So that type of leadership training doesn't fit a whole bunch of society. It just doesn't. And just anything that, you know, and there are, I think that the military service is unfairly, the burden is unfair to minorities and lower economic people that get into it to get the education and an occupation, but it's like it's really a big point for me that it seems that some people have to give way more than others, and it's just not fair. That people that go in the military, even voluntarily, are really political pawns to a great extent, because politicians get us into wars, and then soldiers have to get us out. And but they're the ones that get the wounds and the death and the. I did serve in a in a unit in Fort Sill, a field artillery unit in Fort Sill for 8 months before I went over there. And that was just, I went to work every day in battalion in Fort Sill. In the role I had in at Fort Sill and stateside was they need a safety officer for a live fire. So you'd go out and do that, and come home and go back to your house, and next day they need a payroll officer, so you go get a $40,000 in a suitcase and go somewhere and cash checks, or it was just like everyday life, And the year that I was there in Vietnam, the first month and a half I was there, I got to do something I really enjoyed. Each battalion size unit in Vietnam had a staff officer called an S5, Civil Affairs Officer. And what Civil Affairs did was to liaison or connect with the civilian community in the host country that we were in. And in our case, we had our battalion had a project in a Montagnard village near Pleiku, Vietnam, where we had a detachment of approximately 10 men, and the officer that was in charge of it was S5, Civil Affairs Officer. And what we did was provide some security, but also lifestyle improvement projects for these villagers who were indigenous to the Central Highlands in Vietnam, where I was stationed. And so for 3 weeks, I got to be in charge of that and be with those people and work on, we had built them a fish pond, and we were going to have a rabbit farm because they were always protein deficient, but they farmed under the jungle, and they lived under the 180, 200-foot trees in the jungle and windowless huts that were on stilts. This was the first thing I did when I was shipped, when I arrived in Vietnam. It was because the regular officer that had that job had an emergency at home, so I was able to go out there and fill in for him for 3 weeks. I would have loved to spend the whole year there helping those people. That was more my nature. They were growing crops. They were doing these livestock things. They were very. They loved Americans. They were very loyal to us, as opposed to the not so much the South Vietnamese people, and in fact they were abused really by the regular South Vietnamese population.
Yeah.
The morale over there was terrible. The drugs were the big issue for the cadre dealing with the younger men and their drug issues. The drugs were cheap, and there were people actually staying over there to stay up. It cost a couple dollars a day for a heroin habit there.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of issues with that. We did raids in the middle of the night on the enlisted barracks to find contraband, and there was fragging, the execution of officers and NCOs that were attempting to inhibit the drug trade, and just the morale at that point in 1970 was getting very low. They had all these civilians on the bases, and they'd come in and do housekeeping and cooking and all that. And the one thing we had this guy called the sanitation engineer. He was a Vietnamese civilian that came in, and they would burn human waste every day in diesel fuel. And this guy would come in and from the latrines, and he had a side business of bringing heroin in. And we, like when I had the Camo platoon, I had a couple of heroin addicts, and there, out of 30, 40 guys, there were a couple of them were heroin addicts. One of which turned out to be my Jeep driver. And one time, he was from Jersey or Philadelphia or someplace, and he was actually an addict before he came in the Army. And they had an amnesty program while I was there in the later part of '70 where you could turn yourself in, and he ended up doing that to keep from getting court-martialed. But he was like because of having been an addict in the States, he was a skilled thief. And one time he was my Jeep driver, and being a Camo officer, I had a really deluxe Jeep with 2 radios in instead of 1, so that I could retransmit over hills. Where you had to, before they had satellite radios and stuff, you had to, FM radios, if you had to transmit across the hill, the signal would be blocked out by the hill. So to overcome that, you would put a set of these radios up on top of the hill, and one frequency in, and they're out the other side down. So I had this Jeep, and I had to go to a brigade headquarters or something, and one day, and the general's Jeep was sitting outside the bunker that he was in. And his Jeep, they were these Ford M151A1 Jeeps, the ones that were so dangerous. They had 2 little blackout-like things on the dash that were made out of brass. And so like general or field-grade officers, their drivers would scrape the paint off of those and then polish them. So it was like having fancy hubcaps or something. So I go in to do my errand in this bunker, and I come out, and there's this guy sitting in the Jeep, because I couldn't drive my own Jeep. You can't drive your own Jeep. As an officer, you have to have somebody drive it, or did then. And those things he'd taken them out of the general's Jeep and put them on mine. Just silly stuff, you know. But he ended up, then we had a retransmission set up because we had part of our 4th Division was still back in Pleiku, and most of it was in Ankei, which they're east and west of one another. And there's this Highway 14 that goes across between the two. I think it was 14. Anyway, part of the way over there, this place called Mang Yang Pass, and it was where there was a ambush in 1954, very similar to Dien Bien Phu, where a whole bunch of French troops were killed. And it's very high ground, and there was a cemetery up there for all these French boys. And that's where we put this kind of radio thing. And there were these 2 guys up there that were in the communications platoon, and they lived in a bunker, and all they had to do was keep the batteries charged up on this retransmission, this double radio setup that was up there in this bunker, so that our battalion could communicate with the other side, elements of the battalion that were still on the other side of the mountain, so to speak. And we went up there to inspect what they were doing one day, and they were like rats coming out of a hole. All they'd done was They stayed in there and did coke all day long. And they were like, I'm sure both of them died shortly. I mean, didn't have long life. They were just gone. But the one guy, his nostrils were this big around. And so we brought him back into the light of day, and they end up doing amnesty too, I think. We had put other guys up there. It was just stuff like that, you know, just
Chaos.
yeah. But it was number one was marijuana. There's so much of that you could smell it out in the fire bases in the evening. It'd waft over the and then heroin and cocaine. The heroin was like, say, this guy that came in to do the trash or burn the shit burner is what he was. It was $2 a day versus probably at that time it was 100 or so in the U.S.
Yeah.
For a heroin habit. But just everybody the civilians were doing everything they could to stay alive and make a living. They'd resort to stuff that they wouldn't ordinarily. Normally, the first job for a field artillery officer, a fresh one in Vietnam, was to be a forward observer with an infantry company for a time. And so I did that for 6 months. I went on what was called, they called it, they had this name for what we did. It was patrolling, and it was called search and destroy. What it actually was using ourselves for bait to get in a gunfight, so then we could destroy the enemy, like that we were the lure. Because all we did was we had 100 guys, and it was led by a captain and a first sergeant, and I stayed with them. My job was to provide artillery support or fire when they needed it. So we go out. We usually got inserted with helicopters, and then we'd patrol for indefinite periods of time. And what I carried, I had a team of myself and 2 other enlisted men that was the FO. I was the FO lieutenant. I had a FO sergeant that was actually a 19-year-old Spec 4, and then I had a PFC that was the RTO, radio operator, carried the radio and the batteries. But we were on foot. It carried approximately 80 pounds of stuff in a backpack and attached to my belts and so on. It carried a week or 3 or 4 days worth of sea rations, 11 quarts of water, 300 rounds of M16 ammunition and the M16. 100 of it was in clips, and another 200 rounds in belts. We all carried 300 rounds of ammunition. And then cooking gear. We were using mostly canned sea rations then. They were very heavy. But anyway, we had to jump out of helicopters with that much weight on our backs, and just the abuse that your body took. And then we slept on the ground. And a little, two guys, we each had a poncho, and we'd button them together and put them over a string and sleep under there on air mattresses. One time we were out on one of these patrols for 40 days without a bath, without a change of clothes. And just trudging endlessly through the jungle. And it was very physically exhausting. A lot of times if you were going uphill, you were at the point of passing out in the heat. And, you know, the folks back home never had to do stuff like that in their life, the ones that got out of this. That's what we did. And we did little things to try to make it more comfortable. I don't know. It just was day after day just hiking. And occasionally we'd get in a firefight. Not that often. At that point, they were embellishing the enemy casualty figures by double or triple reporting when we did actually kill someone, that the company encountered. And it was just so political or something. The other background thing that I was going to get into with, it's interesting that historically, Ho Chi Minh actually asked us for help before he went communist. I think this has been pretty well documented that he approached Henry Cabot Lodge, the Secretary of State, about helping him to get France out of his country. That's all those people wanted. They wanted out from under colonialism. And that's what this war was really about. And so they went where they could get help, which wasn't from us. We sided with a corrupt conservative government in the south part of the country, I think, in my opinion. And the rest is history. You think about the waste that was involved with the amount of ammunition we blew up and the amount of bombs we dropped and the what was it for? You know, the contractors to make money? I don't know. But anyway, this is what we do. We trudge through this. So I did that for 6 months, and then I went on R&R and I met my wife in Hawaii. And then when I went back, I became I was promoted to communications officer for a few months, where every battalion had a communications platoon, and so anyway, that was my job for several months. And I lived in the base camp and on cave primarily then. In this outline, there was a thing about, well, was there anything humorous? And there's always humor in everything you do, even though as bad as it can be. But we had the communications platoon had two radio teletype rigs, they were called. They were it was a box that was like 8 feet long that sat in the back of was made to fit in the back of a Dodge 3/4-ton truck, Army truck. And in the process of my year there in that battalion, I was in the 6th 29th Field Artillery Battalion. I had 3 different commanding officer lieutenant colonels. One was an old guy from that had a career starting in World War II that was just about done with the Army. And then I had 2 1954 West Point grads that were lieutenant colonels that were needed to be get a promotion or get out type thing. And they did they tended to do some stuff to show off, to get noticed and everything. But this one colonel told me that we were going out on an operation where with one of our gun batteries on a mountaintop, and that he wanted to send one of the radio teletype outfits out to the fire base to be up there on the mountain with the guns and everybody else. So we took this this box with this really expensive, and it was encrypted and everything too, the radio teletyper, and it had air conditioning. So we take this box out to the airfield, and they lifted it up with the Chinook and took it out to the mountain and set it down. And then they took another load that was it had 2 generators that went with it that had to run day and night to keep it charged up so it'd work. And not long after the thing was out there, there was an electrical storm. It got hit by lightning and destroyed the radios, so the box sat there on the mountain till the mission was over. And when so they brought it back, and then they were bringing the 2 generators in a sling back, and they had this new technology, was nylon webbing for hauling stuff, and lo and behold, one of the nylon ropes broke, and these generators dropped about 1,200 feet to the earth, and it turned them into smashed up parts. But that's what this was like showing off or something, and it just ended up being a waste of thousands of dollars worth of machinery that taxpayers had to pay for. But it was laughable.
Yes.
Anyway, just there were things like that. And there were also some very, one of the last things I did, it was towards the end of when I was FO, I participated in what is now described as the Cambodian incursion.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. 10 days ago, in my report to the nation on Vietnam, I announced the decision to withdraw an additional 150,000 Americans from Vietnam over the next year. I said then that I was making that decision despite our concern over increased enemy activity in Laos, in Cambodia, and in South Vietnam. And at that time, I warned that if I concluded that increased enemy activity in any of these areas endangered the lives of Americans remaining in Vietnam, I would not hesitate to take strong and effective measures to deal with that situation. Despite that warning, North Vietnam has increased its military aggression in all these areas, and particularly in Cambodia. After full consultation with the National Security Council, Ambassador Bunker, General Abrams, and my other advisors, I have concluded that the actions of the enemy in the last 10 days clearly endanger the lives of Americans who are in Vietnam now and would constitute an unacceptable risk to those who will be there after withdrawal of another 150,000. To protect our men who are in Vietnam and to guarantee the continued success of our withdrawal and Vietnamization programs, I have concluded that the time has come for action.
And it was 12 days in May, from the 5th to the 16th of May. The 4th Infantry Division, plus a part of the South Vietnamese Army, invaded Cambodia with the purpose of cutting off interfering with the supply traffic on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And so we we were in Nan K then, which was quite a, we rode in trucks over to the Cambodian border to an airfield, the aluminum airfield, and it was called New Play di Jarang. And that's where we did the kickoff to go into Cambodia from there in helicopters. And we went over and they established like 6 fire bases at this one in the over the top of this one section of the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Cambodia. And so I was still a forward observer, and the company that I was with, instead of patrolling, it was their turn to be every like 4th operation, the company I was with would be the fire base security. And then there'd be 3 operations where they were out doing the infantry patrols and so on. That was rotated. But anyway, it was our turn to be base security. So we went to a place they named LZ Dragon. And what it basically was a flat, either pasture field or former rice paddy, where there were no trees or no cover, just a big open field that was probably a couple 100 acres, that we put 6 guns, 8 guns in there, so battery of 105s and a couple of 155s, and spent the entire 2 weeks there. But anyway, it wasn't I didn't think it was a particularly good fire base because it had a tree line. It was flat. It had no elevation advantage. And usually they built fire bases on top of mountains so they could have the advantage of being on top of the castle, so to speak, shooting down. And this one could have very easily been overrun, but fortunately it didn't. A couple of the other ones, there were 6 of them altogether. A couple did get overrun and people got killed and everything. But then the other thing that there was a horrible accident at this airfield while we were gone. Chinook tipped over on top of a 2.5-ton truck full of soldiers. I don't know how many were killed. There were different rumors and stories, but that was because of the Army chose to kill all the vegetation around the airfield. And so when it rained, it was muddy, and when it was dry, there was dust, and the helicopter pilot apparently couldn't see in the dust, and his helicopter tipped away from the field down where the rotor blades went through this truck, and I don't know how many people, I don't know what the real story is, but when we got back, it was all cleaned up, and it was just a rumor. This was also the operation where Richard Nixon went on television and denied us that there were any troops in Cambodia. It was an out and out lie. We were there, and they kept the reporters away from us. But anyway, whether it was successful or not, they never really said. We just went on to the next thing. Got back. But there were accidents all the time. It's a dangerous, dangerous business.
What was your daily routine at that fire base in Cambodia?
Oh, just we would, one of the things we had to do in the artillery, as soon as we got the guns in there and the thing set up and the perimeter and everything, my job was to install defensive targets, and those were, they were pre-surveyed. In other words, if you imagine this fire base as a big circle, and say it's this 100 or 200 acre field, you would have defensive targets for the artillery, for other people's artillery. It wasn't for our guns. We had direct fire capability with our guns. What we got from the neighboring fire bases, and it was done both ways, was we would call up their guns and fire these single rounds till we found a place where we wanted to have a defensive target, number 1 or 2 or 3, whatever. It would be a certain hole in our fire base or just outside the perimeter, where in case we got overrun, it was it was like a speed dial for a phone. You could say, call up the guns, say DT1, and they would immediately start shooting on that surveyed location to defend the fire base. But it was done by your neighboring. There were overlapping. These fire bases were close enough that they could shoot into one another if necessary to defend them. And it was all coordinated by the FOs and the liaison officers and it was tied into the Navy, and if you were near shore, you had naval capability, and you always had Air Force fighters that could be called in as well. But it was all interlocking, like predetermined targets, basically, and then you could move if it was a place to start out, and if you had some activity or a bunch of enemy troops, you could move it over in increments and try to bombard them and so on. That's kind of oversimplified, but the guns also had, if a self-defense situation for the fire base, the six, I was in the smallest caliber gun was the 10, that was our basic weapon, was the 105 howitzer. And they had anti-personnel rounds for those guns that were it was like a shotgun shell that you would level the gun and fire at charging troops. And the 105 round had 8,000 little tungsten carbide darts, fin stabilized darts the shell would go a few feet outside the gun barrel and split, and it'd be the world's biggest shotgun shell. That's nasty. But that's the kind of stuff we had and used. We had about eight or nine different shells for those guns. Some of them were for illumination, some were for incendiary. They had white phosphorus rounds to burn people with or burn stuff with. They had high explosive. They had all different kind of fuses that you could put into, like you could set a fuse to delay after it hits the ground so it can bury itself and then blow up.
This was only 12 days of getting in, establishing these fire bases. How much resistance did you experience from?
We didn't. Where I was, we were fortunate. We didn't get any activity right at our base. We ended up supporting. I think there was the next base down from us got overrun, but so our guns would have been supporting them, firing on enemies for them. But the book that I have has a map of it. Yeah, here. I think there's 6 of them in there. I was at the one called Dragon.
Did they let you know how long you were gonna? Did you know it was gonna be 12 days, or was there a lot of confusion? Even
No,
like what your
we
mission
just
was.
got, we went over there, set everything up. The engineers, there's a whole process. They needed bunkers, so they cut trees down and filled sandbags and made bunkers and all that stuff for people to be protected in, and gun pits, and they would even bring. They had this little one model of case bulldozer they'd bring in, and they'd actually bulldoze they'd bring it in with a helicopter and run it around, dig the pits for the guns, and then take it back out. And then when they left, they mostly just blew everything up so it can be used with C4. But as far as the routine, there was stuff to do every day. You were always busy. It wasn't really a whole lot of leisure time. Write letters about all you could do. But
As an officer, you're in charge of how many people?
well, in that case, I was just in charge of three, myself and two others, because I was there. The way that's set up is, okay, you have an infantry division. An infantry division has generally 3 line brigades and a headquarters brigade. The 3 line ones are the riflemen and the heavy weapons and the actual combatants. And then the headquarters battery is all your logistics, adjutant general, intelligence, civil affairs, and supply. And but then they would be backed up. In the case of field artillery, each brigade in the 4th Infantry Division had a battalion of 105 artillery to support it, which was 3 batteries with 6 guns and a headquarters battery. And just everything in the service is 3s. Down from it's a gigantic pyramid of command and control. And but that's the way the ratio of artillery to infantry is roughly 3-to-1, and so that's what we did. So what I was, my commanding officer was the battery commander of this 1-gun battery, this 105 battery, but I was physically walking with a company commander of one of these infantry companies when we were patrolling, and I was there to support them. Even though I wasn't directly in, I was not really directly taking orders from the captain of the, but all the other, but same with they had medics and other support people that went with the company. But that's
What year is this again?
1970.
Okay, so you're an 01 at the time?
By then, yes. Yeah. I got promoted after it was 01 to 02 was automatic then. I don't know, maybe it still is. Unless you got in trouble.
Given that you've experienced 40 days without showering and terrible weather, and it's hot and humid, and it's just always heavy equipment, what was the sense of morale amongst the rest of the soldiers and officers?
It's pretty blah. Just because there was there wasn't much decisive success. That it wasn't like frontal warfare. It was just like I say, it was like they appeared to figure out that to send us out, and the thing was, we were fighting with these people that wore car tire shoes and had a bag of rice in a canteen and a rifle, and they were stealthy, and we were crashing through the jungle with pots and pans and all this canned food and this, we were so, like a herd of elephants going through the jungle, and they were sneaky, and they could surprise us, and occasionally they did, and then there was a shootout, but myself, I didn't ever get directly involved in that because I was busy with my map and my radio telling my guns where to shoot to help these people. That was my job. The whole time I was over there, I talked to her once through a ham operator. There was no internet, cell phones, any of that stuff that troops have now. Wrote letters every day. About it. Tried to keep clean and healthy, and but it was a filthy, dirty place. It was just, I don't know, just dirty, hot. You'd be exhausted every night and just put one of these little pup tents up and with the other troops and crash and wake up and do it again. Everybody cooked their own meals, the sea rations. There wasn't, once in a while they'd send us out a chicken dinner or something and mashed potatoes on a helicopter, but for the most part it was World War II style sea rations. Now, towards the end, they had these freeze-dried meals that were much lighter that you just had to add water to, and they were pretty good, but they were originally designed for LRPs, for long-range patrol people, but we got some of those, and they were but it was just like, the sea rations were like if you went and got 24 cans of Campbell's soup and put them in your rucksack. That's about what it was. It's heavy. But my daughter was born in April of 70, March 31st of 70, and I got a telegraph about it, or a telegram. I was out doing something in the jungle. I missed that.
Was your communication by writing letters effective in the way that when you wrote a letter back home, you usually got something back?
Yes, it was. That was more. I still have all the letters, both ways. I'm in a box. I don't know why or how I brought those home, but they're there somewhere. I haven't looked at them in a long time, but it was a mistake. The whole country made a huge mistake with that war. The amount of ordnance that was dropped on Vietnam, those B-52 raids, and then I didn't even have any. I've experienced Agent Orange too. I finally 2 years ago was diagnosed with prostate cancer, so I didn't dodge that bullet either. And I'm actually on full disability now, the VA. But that whole thing there can get me really angry, because what I've read is that Dow Chemical Company, instead of there was the dioxin that causes cancer, was a chemical that was put in this mixture for catalyst to form the product, the weed killer, brush killer, whatever it was. It was not an essential ingredient. It could have been removed and disposed of. They chose to dispose of it through the product. And I know it's radical, but I feel like that company should have been bankrupted over that and forced to pay for all this disability and all the cancer treatments. And I was lucky. I got diagnosed early, and but I mean, that was after 50 years that this showed up in me. And I thought I'd beaten it. It's funny, on one of our trips down to Florida, and we only moved to Florida in 18, stopped at the first rest area up in northern Florida when you come out of Georgia, and went in the bathroom, and I encountered inside the men's room, there was this old beat-up guy that had a Marine veteran hat on, and he could barely walk. And so I helped him out to his car, and he said, and we, exchanged whatever. He said, I got killed in Vietnam, but I'm not dead yet. But he was dead. He had 2 kinds of cancer, and he was about gone. And there's something else that wasn't shared fairly either. Why send people into the whole concept? When I said that in my little thing that it was unwilling being led by the unqualified, I thought the leadership there was extremely poor with the strategic decisions they made, with something like trying to denude a whole country of vegetation with chemicals. In the process of doing that, we destroyed crops that everybody needed to eat there. There were places where you could see that at one time they had rice paddies up this river valley, the Bongsong River, and the paddy walls were up halfway up the sides of the hill. But in 1970, they were only farming right by the river. And it was because all the ordnance had blown holes in the dams that held the water in to grow the rice. And probably the most poignant thing I ever saw over there about why war is so awful. We were hiking through this pasture field one day, and I came upon we were trained in the artillery to do forensics on blast holes. If you looked at this, like where an artillery shell hits, there's a kind of a mushroom-shaped hole that gets blown in the dirt. And you can, if you're smart enough, you can tell what the caliber is and who made the gun and all that stuff, and where it came from, what direction it came from. But anyway, so there's this blast hole in the dirt there, and here's the head of a cow, and there's the carcass of a cow. And what they did all night long there was they'd get people up at 3 a.m. and just shoot artillery out into the abyss. It was called harassment and interdiction. And it was to try to terrorize the VC and the NVA, and that they thought might be out there. Well, if you shoot enough of those things, you're going to hit a cow or some animal eventually. And the thing, when the cow had rotted, it was just a skeleton. but it couldn't give milk and it couldn't be eaten, could it? It was a waste. And that's what war is. And that's why what we're doing here, we have to stop having wars, because society can't afford it. That's just my take on it. It was like a waste of an animal that could have been nutrition for a family for how long? It was killed and gone to waste.
So when do you know that you're going to be getting out of the military?
Well, I knew that because I ended up, my obligation was 2 years and 10 months. It was the 10 months of training. So I went 2 months of basic, 2 months of AIT. I was trained to be this officer candidate school for artillery. You go to basic training that everybody takes, 2 months at Fort Leonard Wood. Then there was a 2 month training in to be a fire direction person that did the gun settings, calculated the gun settings. That was the backup job in case you were a failure in officer candidate school. So then you graduated from that, and you became an E5 for pay, and then you go to 6 months of officer candidate school, which is a general education, military education with a specific training on field artillery, and then you get commissioned. So the original obligation was for the 2 years of the draft plus the 10 months of training. But when I got done with Vietnam, I only had I had less than 90 days left, so they just discharged me. And I went back to, I actually left the service in Fort Lewis, Washington.
When did you know you were leaving Vietnam?
I just knew that I was leaving when my 1 year obligation was up. I wasn't going to stay. Not one day.
Yeah.
I couldn't stay. That one extra. Oh, I'm sorry. My wife's one cousin was in the Army as a dog handler, and he was sent to Vietnam, and dog handlers ended up being the point men for the infantry. They were the one that went down the trail first with the dog and the shotgun. Okay? And this guy, David, did that for a whole year, and his tour was up, and of course this bond between the dog and the handler thing is legendary, what they did. And so he volunteered to go out on one last mission with this dog. So he did, and it was going down the trail, and they encountered enemy troops, and they killed his dog, and then they machine gunned him. And he spent 6 months in Walter Reed getting his life back because he volunteered to go out one more time. He did live.
When being there, like, you knew the exact date you were going to be leaving, though? So were you counting it down that, like, I know I'm leaving?
The short time calendar, not exactly, but you go through a cycle over there of when you initially get there, they picked us up in and another bad thing about Vietnam was everybody went over there as the Lone Ranger. You didn't go with a regiment or something like in World War II, where you already had friends from being in training. You just went as an individual, and then you got they decided where you needed to go from there. And so we landed in Tan Son Nhut Air Base, and was a commercial plane, a Flying Tiger or somebody, contractor. So the first thing you see, they come out to get you off the plane with a bus that has bomb screens on it. So, you go through a phase of being fearful, of course. You've never been in anything like that before, especially out in the country in Michigan. This was, but then so then I got assigned to this 4th Division artillery thing because I was trained to be an artilleryman. And we were in Pleiku at that time, our base, and so I went out, and after I did this little gig with the Montagnard village, I was assigned to this infantry company that I stayed with for 6 months. And so when I first went out, they issued us a flak jacket and among other things, a gas mask. And I said, it's all right. And so I wore that thing, and I carried that gas mask around for about 2 days. The next helicopter came in, I got rid of it because it was just too heavy. And so you go through being frightened, and then you get complacent, and then right at the end you get frightened again because something could happen and screw it all up and not make it home. But it's a cycle. In between there, you're pretty complacent about. You just respond to whatever happens and try to do your best at it.
Do you recall the day that you left Vietnam, like in the plane?
Yeah. Well, I recall the morning I was going to leave. I was in. Incidentally, before I forget, it's interesting because when I did this thing with the Montagnards, every Thursday we had a 2.5-ton truck at the village, and we'd haul some of the Montagnards into town to the city market, and they'd take chickens and bananas and stuff and sell them. And so I rode shotgun in the truck when we did that. So I had this impression of downtown Pleiku that was really bad. But now it's like, I've seen pictures of it, and they have skyscrapers and everything, and it's just this, I guess it's like 500,000 people or something, and all these beautiful buildings. So, why was communism so bad if they have all that stuff now? But at the time, Pleiku was a dump. It stunk. It was filthy. It had sewage running through the city market. And but anyway, the last day I went down to the mess hall, and because I was going to get a plane out, we had moved, the base had moved to Anke, which was east, more almost towards the ocean. And a rocket flew over the mess hall and landed in the airfield, blew a hole in the airfield, and so the plane was delayed getting out of there. And I thought, oh, God, my last day. But anyway, they got it patched up, and eventually it got on this plane that was like, have you ever seen the movie Air America? Okay. Well, anyway, it was a C-123 provider, Fairchild cargo plane. And it's the ones that they use for spraying Agent Orange. They'd put these big rubber tanks in them and for the spray material. And then when they wanted to move troops around, they'd take the tanks out and put seats in. But anyway, I got on one of them. And the plane was so lame, power-wise, it just sat there and moaned and groaned and moaned and groaned. And it had little jets on it that they turned on to help it take off. And it got off the ground, and I went to Cameron Bay, and then I spent a night there and a day and another night before I got on a plane to go home. But the one thing I did, they had a ski boat at Cameron at the replacement center, and I got to water ski on Cameron Bay. I can say it was, I don't know, so what? But then I flew back to Fort Lewis, that's where we went out of to go over there. And it ended up being the 4th Infantry Division headquarters for a few years, I guess. 4th Infantry was famous. It was organized in 1918 for World War I, and it played a big part in the fighting in Normandy during World War II. They had a lot of casualties. Was one of just a basic Army infantry division. Wasn't anything special like the 1st Cav or airborne or anything like that. It was just a everyday bread and butter infantry division.
What was it like being back in the United States, given the political climate at the time with a lot of...
Wasn't nice. It kind of didn't talk about anything. I flew into San Francisco from Fort Lewis because my wife had been living in Los Angeles area with her sister. She came up, and that's where I don't know, for some reason that's where we met. And that San Francisco was particularly antagonistic to, we had to get out of uniform right away. And I mean, because all you had was uniforms to travel in, but got rid of them as soon as possible because you didn't want to be, harassed by anybody. It was, like something we were supposed to be ashamed of, I guess. I don't know. And it was very disappointing that, job hunting, jobs and stuff were hard to find then too. All I wanted to do was come home and work. It took me 3 months to get a job that I wanted. So.
Was it a struggle adapting back to civilian life?
Not for me. Because I didn't want anything to do with military life in the first place. Yeah, it wasn't my cup of tea. I wasn't in high school, I wasn't an athlete. I was a musician and a nerd. I got good grades and I was a musician. I was not a football player, jock, or anything like that. And those are a lot of the guys, those football players, and they got out of going, the ones that like to fight and stuff. I didn't fight. We're the only species of animals that kill their own species for the most part. What's about that? Why is that? Politicians.
Did you establish any friendships long-term over there?
Couple. One, I just met with, my wife and I met with, I had one friend in another lieutenant from upstate New York in the unit I was in. And the guy that I just hit it off with, and that I kept track of, and we got together up in heap winters in Palm Coast, and we live here permanently, so we met up in Claremont for an evening, and it was really awesome. He actually helped me get the disability thing with the Agent Orange because he'd already been through a couple different cancer things, and anyway, we just had dinner and a few drinks and talked a lot, but hadn't seen him for 52 years. He's just like he was. And then I kept up my I referred to my FO sergeant. Oh, had these two guys that were my underlings. That was Dorian Dowell. He was the sergeant. And then there was this guy. He was from Baltimore, and he was educated. This guy is from the hills of North Carolina. His name was Jackie Johnson. And he was smoking with the little Montagnard kids smoked. They liked our cigarettes, or the C ration cigarettes. They loved those. And but those were the two guys that were my crew. And he was just, I don't want to, how do I want to say this? But anyway, I lost track of him. He hated the Army because he got drafted. He was like 18 or 19. But they came out with this deal where you could re-up for 6 years and then get a few $1,000. So he did that, and he went AWOL after he got home, and because they gave him a leave with it, and he went and bought a GTO and went AWOL with his $6,000 bonus. I know they caught up to him because the other guy, Dorian, told me that he showed back up and they worked together again. Actually, without me, they didn't replace me. But
What about any organizations? Like, did you join any of those after you got out?
no, I looked at the VFW for a while, but those people weren't there waiting for us at the airport. They were during Vietnam. The VFW and American Legion had so many members that they didn't need us. They had all their own. There were so many people in the service in World War II that they didn't need Vietnam veterans to. And there was a cultural difference, between Vietnam veterans who had a bad attitude for the most part, and I went to a couple of get-togethers for the VFW, and they were, just not in. They were. It was a whole different culture. The World War II veterans and the Vietnam veterans. So I didn't. I don't like to go sit and drink for hours on end every weekend at a VFW. Anyway, it's what a lot of them did was. Hey, it shouldn't be that way, but it's really. That was the drug of World War II, was booze.
How do you think your military experience affected your life? Besides, I understand.
I think
Agent Orange and cancer and all that, but aside from
made me cynical, which I don't mind being cynical anymore. It just because it just. And it's just way that I guess what I really have a problem with. One time I was up home recently, last 4 or 5 years, and this one state politician is from our little town. We actually have a state senator that came from my hometown, and he had this deal at a school somewhere. He's just a total politician. Always getting working at getting reelected, and actually lives off he needs the job to have a living type thing. But he was made a big deal out of he was going to give Vietnam veterans these pins. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe I'll go get one of them while I'm up there. This was after we moved down here. Well, we moved all over after. My wife and I have had 14, 15 different houses since we came back from Vietnam. But I thought about it. That guy didn't go in himself, but he's given out these. For all that misery, I get a little pin, and it's some, hoop-de-doo, like, now everybody wants to, we support our veterans. And even like when you were in the Afghanistan thing, everybody was supportive of the veterans. Well, were you really? Did you really care what they were going through? Or how can you relate to that? You can't be a veteran if you weren't one, or experience that stuff. The physical misery of it, and the pointless, some of the motives that are involved in having people go into the service, but to glorify, or you're a great patriot because you did this and that and you served, and it doesn't carry any water with me. It just isn't adequate compensation. The fact that you underpaid, you couldn't get housing, the people that really needed it didn't get squat. You just got used. And so, especially my side, I did get, only lately have I gotten anything out of the Veterans Administration. I'd rather not have the condition and not have the money, but I have gotten full disability for the Agent Orange, and I also got about $12,000 worth of hearing aids because of the gun noise. I got hearing damage from the artillery. Went to a reunion of I do belong to a 4th Infantry Association, the 4th Infantry Division Association. And this is our logo and everything. They have a chapter that's all artillerymen. And I went to they had a reunion down in Fort Sill, so my wife and I drove down to it a few years ago. And it was funny, there were about 40 people there, and minimum 50% of the men there had hearing aids, because we'd all been and you didn't wear hearing protection around those guns back then, because you had to be able to hear commands. And if you put earmuffs on, somebody could yell at you, and they didn't. It was before they had all this, where you had radios that you could communicate. I mean, they've made improvements. That they have these headphones that you can visit on with your fellow soldiers, but also protect your ears from the blast, stuff. But one night I was sleeping in a bunker under the barrel of we were in this LZ called Hard Times, was more or less a permanent one the whole time Vietnam was on, and sleeping under the 155 howitzer had this huge muzzle brake on it to control the recoil on the gun. When how the barrel comes back part of the mechanism is hydraulic, but part of it's that they have this slanted blast thing on the muzzle. And right where we were sleeping right under where that muzzle blast and they were shooting this gun off in the middle of the night, doing these, harassment firings, and one of them just, the thing went off, and just I felt like somebody hit me on the side of the head with a hammer, and so I have tinnitus, and it's probably from that. But they did give me 3 nice sets of hearing aids so far. Yeah.
Was there anything positive that you took away?
I think it probably made me more stalwart than I ever would have been. I endured that, which was, I'd say that I got that out of it. I can take abuse. I don't know how to quite explain that, but I feel like it made me, of course it's nothing like being a POW or something, but it was being in the service, forced to go someplace 7,000 miles away, be by yourself and not with your family, and have it just be so tedious. But I lived through it. I survived, I thrived through it, actually. And so maybe it strengthened me in that regard. But that would be primarily, I never got, the thing is, I really wanted to volunteer, or tried to get in the Corps of Engineer OCS, because I felt like in that you could learn road and bridge building, and, they had, machinery that was similar to agricultural stuff, and that would have been something useful. Or in hindsight, I would go probably after high school and go in the Coast Guard, because you could learn to run a ship, But field artillery has only one civilian application, and that's doing avalanche control in ski resorts. They use artillery to blast snow masses to get them to come down voluntarily. But it's useless. It's a useless occupation. And other than, MPs, you can go into police work. Engineers, you can do civil engineering. Or, it's civil engineering basically is what it is. It's useful. If you work in a motor pool, you can be a mechanic.
Now, I know you go into Vietnam already after the war has started, so you already have a perspective of what is going on there, and the country's overall perspective of what's happening. Does your perspective about war change dramatically after being there?
Yes.
And how so?
To the point that I think that it's hardly ever justifiable. And it's interesting, a few years ago, and he probably got criticized for it, but Jimmy Carter said that in our history, there's only been like 14 or 16 years out of 200 and some that we haven't been at war somewhere. That's nothing to be proud of. What we would be proud of is that people don't have to go to war and don't have to die and don't have to get hurt and don't have to waste ordnance and stuff. If you think about the stuff that we destroyed or lost or blew up over there, that what you could do with the same material, and it's the old thing of beating swords into plowshares so you can till the soil rather than kill people. That's where it's at for me. That's how I think. And being in the service only, I probably was headed that direction anyway, but it just solidified my feelings about it. That there's a war is actually a political failure. And there are some that have to be done. World War II there was a enormous evil loose in the world that had to be eliminated, but I don't think it was in Vietnam. The people of Vietnam wanted France out of their country. And they got it out, finally. Look how long it took them.
Yeah.
And they apparently now appear like the city of Pleiku, the fact that it's so prosperous looking. I've had people that have been over there think it's a beautiful place now, but it sure was ugly then. I mean, the military operations make everything ugly. I mean, the stuff they build to, house troops and the way they go at it, and, no consideration for the environment. And this thing of using, we poisoned the soil over there. The people that really suffered from Agent Orange are the Montagnard people. They're still dealing with like deformed children and stuff from that, because they lived right under the canopy. Were at this village I was in, they were living in these huts, they're windowless, and they were tribal. They had a village chief and everything, but every time it rained, that stuff would have washed down on them into their food supply and their soil and their, everything. And it'll take generations for them to get that purged out of there. And the whole concept that's how we're going to fight this war is to deprive the whole country of food. Or did they not think, or did they only think about denuding it so they could find the enemy troops? But that's the commander's job. But I don't like General Westmoreland. I don't think he was any kind of genius. And he presided over that for a long time. That idea of, and then, like say, the contractors that go along with this stuff, Dow Chemical and the other ones, they we ended up having to give them rice because they didn't have enough they couldn't grow enough. Brought rice from the United States to Vietnam. Gave it away.
What about any messages or anything you want to relay to future generations who may stumble upon this video, this interview, or any other story about Vietnam? What do you want them to take away from your experience?
I would like them to be able to empathize with what myself and my family went through because of it. I would like them to be able to realize what happened and take responsibility for having it not happen again. That's what we should have gotten out of that. And so we learned from Vietnam what? And then we went to Iraq and Afghanistan. And it just goes on and on and on. And the departure from Afghanistan was just a rewrite of the one in Vietnam in '75, the same helicopter taking people off a roof, right? And but like this accident that happened out there where these I don't know that. I wish I really knew that. I might get the. I haven't really read that book yet. I might have an accurate accounting of the people who were killed in the chopper. Originally the rumor was that 12 people died instantly when that thing, but it flipped over because supposedly the pilot, because they denuded the field around the airfield, there was all this dust and he couldn't see, and he got vertigo. He couldn't tell where he was at, and he tipped his chopper slightly to the side of the airfield at the precise time that a truck went by, and one of the rotor blades went into the truck and killed some people instantly that way. And then the whole, because the torque of those rotors, it flipped over completely upside down right on top of the truck. But it was because of the dust that they couldn't see what he was doing, and it made the way they did that stuff. It was always so dirty. You know, the place was either mud or a dust storm. You know, and it was because they made it that way because of killing the grass. Ordinarily, there would have been elephant grass growing around the whole thing and keeping the soil in place. But because of the military mentality, some little Viet Cong might hide in the grass there and shoot somebody. So we'll denode the whole country. And I just thought of one last thing that is political that you may or may not want to put this in.
So is there anything you want people, fellow Americans, to understand about veterans in general?
I guess that they need to understand that that veterans have experienced things that it would be nice if you didn't have to, but they've done it, and they need utmost respect for it and care. Especially when stuff like this, you know, you find out that 50 years ago you got poisoned because some company put some toxic stuff in a product that was used on the battlefield. And you know, like I say, I don't know if I'm okay or not. I'm still taking treatments for it, but I resent that was done. You know, and it's no different than using mustard gas in World War I and whatnot. You know, I don't know. And then you get into, well, if you're in a war, you got to fight to win. So you pull out all the stops, but it really comes down to that the grief from war isn't shared equally by all Americans. There's too many people that, you know, like I worked for a Danish company for quite a few years, and they had some of the North American operation of a Danish company, and in Denmark you have to give like 2 years of your life to the government. Everybody, I think, pretty much universal, whether it's military or some kind of service, that they don't let certain people out of it. Maybe that's it. But
Well, if there's nothing else, I think that concludes our interview for today. I'd like to thank you, Phillip, for participating in this. I know it's not easy to discuss some of the experiences, especially in a war like or conflict like Vietnam. And I'd like to thank you for opening up to me and sharing your experiences with me.
I'd like to thank you for listening to me so intently. Thank you.